Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that the tract of land in the territories of Montana and Wyoming, lying near the headwaters of the Yellowstone River, and described as follows, to wit, commencing at the junction of Gardiner's River with the Yellowstone River, and running east to the meridian, passing 10 miles to the eastward of the most eastern point of Yellowstone Lake, thence south along said meridian to the parallel of latitude, passing 10 miles south of the most southern point of Yellowstone Lake, then west along said parallel to the meridian, passing 15 miles west of the most western point of Madison Lake, thence north along said meridian to the latitude of the junction of Yellowstone and Gardiner's Rivers, thence east to the place of beginning, is hereby reserved and withdrawn from settlement, occupancy, or sale under the laws of the United States, and dedicated and set apart as a public park or pleasuring ground for the benefit and enjoyment of the people, and all persons who shall locate or settle upon or occupy the same or any part thereof, except as hereinafter provided, shall be considered trespassers and removed therefrom. That said public park shall be under the exclusive control of the Secretary of the Interior, whose duty it shall be, as soon as practical, to make and publish such rules and regulations as he may deem necessary or proper for the care and management of the same. Such regulations shall provide for the preservation from injury or spoliation of all timber, mineral deposits, natural curiosities or wonders within said park, and their retention in their natural condition. The Secretary may, in his discretion, grant leases for building purposes for terms not exceeding 10 years, of small parcels of ground at such places in said park as shall require the erection of buildings for the accommodation of visitors. All of the proceeds of said leases, and all other revenues that may be derived from any source connected with said park, to be expended under his direction in the management of the same, and the construction of roads and bridle paths therein. He shall provide against the wanton destruction of the fish and game found within said park, and against their capture or destruction for the purposes of merchandise or profit. He shall also cause all persons trespassing upon the same after the passage of this act be removed therefrom, and generally shall be authorized to take all such measures as shall be necessary or proper to fully carry out the objects and purposes of this act. Thus reads the proclamation preceding the Yellowstone National Park Protection Act, signed on March 1st, 1872, by President Ulysses S. Grant, to set apart a certain tract of land lying near the headwaters of the Yellowstone River as a public park and protect the wonders within. And thus, Yellowstone National Park was born. Spanning nearly 9,000 square kilometers across the states of Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, Yellowstone National Park has inspired and enchanted visitors from around the world. Each year, approximately 3 million people visit the park and marvel at its beauty. It's easy to see why. With over 69,000 species of native trees and plants, 67 species of mammals, and impressive geological features like geysers and hydrothermal lakes, Yellowstone is an unparalleled expanse of nature with an untouched ecosystem, considered to be the largest intact within the northern temperate zone. Still, human hands have played their part in shaping the history and landscape of the park. Widely considered the first national park in America, there has been some debate about the accuracy of that claim, with some sources instead suggesting that it was Hot Springs in Arkansas. While Hot Springs, Arkansas was set aside as a national reservation in 1832, it wasn't until 1921 that it was named a national park. Another point of confusion is the matter of Yosemite in California, which existed as a state park prior to Yellowstone being named a national one. Yosemite's status and existence as a state park had a strong influence on the founding of Yellowstone, with the State Park Act being used as a model to draft the National Park Act that resulted in the creation of Yellowstone National Park, America's first national park. Indeed, the National Park Services suggests that Yellowstone may initially have been intended to be a state park like Yosemite, but there was one crucial difference. Where Yosemite is firmly within the state of California, Yellowstone's boundaries made it difficult to assign it solely to one territory, as it lies within three: Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. Yellowstone is predominantly within the borders of Wyoming state, with 96% of the sprawling ecosystem contained within Wyoming, 3% in Montana, and only 1% in Idaho. In modern times, the entire park falls under the jurisdiction of the United States District Court for the District of Wyoming, making it the only federal court district that includes portions of more than one state. While the park officially opened in 1872, Yellowstone existed for thousands of years before then, and humans made use of its bounty long before European settlers first arrived in the region surrounding Yellowstone in the early 1800s. Fur traders, they traveled the length of the Yellowstone River, seeking to trade. And in the years directly preceding the creation of the park, and by extent the entire National Park Service, various expeditions led by European settlers were born out of fur trappers and fur traders' expeditions into the depths of the park. The most famous of these official expeditions, the Lewis and Clark expedition, did not pass through the region of Yellowstone National Park itself, but it passed close nearby, and upon their return, a member of their party remained behind: John Colter. Considered to be the first European American to step foot in the untamed wilderness surrounding Yellowstone, John Colter's foray into the region we now call Yellowstone was the subject of much debate during his time. When he returned, telling tales of stench-spewing bubbling mud, lakes of brilliant colours, and steam spilling forth from the ground, many laughed and called him crazy, the area allegedly becoming known as Colter's Hell. But Colter's Hell was real, and the volcanic nature of Yellowstone was known by Native Americans long before Europeans ever set foot within its bounds. The earliest written account we have referring to the Yellowstone volcano comes from a map, drawn onto a bison pelt by an unknown Native American person. James Wilkinson, governor of the Louisiana Territory of the time, wrote of this map in 1805 in a letter to then-President Jefferson. 40-odd years later, in 1851, the Bridger de Smet map shows a great volcanic country, about 100 miles in extent, which, along with other information provided by trappers, led to the first formal expeditions into Yellowstone National Park. Many historic accounts tell of these expeditions, alongside the earlier one of Lewis and Clark. The 1869 Folsom-Cook-Peterson expedition was not a formally or federally funded one, and though they were unable to secure a military escort during a time of upheaval, David E. Folsom, C.W. Cook, and William Peterson braved the wilderness. Their expedition, and Folsom's later account of it is what led to further expeditions, including the Washburn Exploring Expedition of 1870, the Hayden Expedition of 1871, and finally, the naming of Yellowstone as a national park. In fact, while he had neither the standing or funding to formally propose that Yellowstone be set aside as a park, Folsom's exploration of the region together with Cook and Peterson, and Folsom's later published report, is what set the wheels in motion. The Washburn and Hayden expeditions further explored the park, and Hayden himself became influential in campaigning for the park. Today, the Hayden Valley now bears his name. In the year before Yellowstone National Park opened, the Indian Appropriation Act of 1871 reversed the previous policy that had existed since George Washington's time. Prior to this act, Native Americans had been described and considered as distinct, independent political communities or dependent nations, and had a semi-sovereign ability to sign treaties. Obligations of pre-existing treaties were not affected by the introduction of the Act, but going forward, any future recognition of Native American tribes as nations or independent powers was forbidden. No further treaties could be negotiated. It's somewhat ironic then that at the time the federal government was focused on the protection of native wildlife and preserving the landscape and wilderness, the Native American people whose cultures had not only lived in these landscapes, but tended to them for thousands of years, were instead forced out. In the years just before Yellowstone was established as a national park, the United States military was in the final stages of forcing Native American people onto reservations. Then, in the years following, early park superintendents actively discouraged tribes from visiting the park, either to hunt or to collect resources. Yellowstone, a place of great importance to many tribes, became somewhere that Native Americans could no longer go, as infrastructure and policy considered neither the needs nor the knowledge of these people, and was instead focused on providing white European American park-goers with creature comforts for their visits. But not all interactions between European and Native Americans were adversarial. Prior to the initial opening of the park, in the years when expeditions still explored its depths, early European American trappers, prospectors, and explorers were not only aware of the use of Yellowstone by the Native American people, they also engaged in trade with them, noted trails of use, and artifacts like spearheads and arrow tips. Maine-born mountain man and later politician Osborne Russell was one of these explorers. A trapper, he wrote of his experiences, including his ventures into the Yellowstone region, where he shared a fire with Native Americans and traded wares. After following a branch of what he believed to be the Yellowstone River, Russell and his band happened upon a group of what he refers to in his journal as Snake Indians. In his own words, "Here we found a few Snake Indians, comprising 6 men, 7 women, and 8 or 10 children, who were the only inhabitants of the lonely and secluded spot. They were all neatly clothed in dressed deer and sheepskins of the best quality, and seemed to be perfectly contented and happy. They were rather surprised at our approach, and retreated to the heights, where they might have a view of us without apprehending any danger, but having persuaded them of our pacific intentions, we succeeded in getting them to encamp with us. Their personal property consisted of 1 old butcher knife nearly worn to the back, 2 old shattered fusees which had long since become useless for want of ammunition, a small stone pot, and about 30 dogs on which they carried their skins, clothing, provisions, etc. on their hunting excursions. They were well armed with bows and arrows pointed with obsidian. The bows were beautifully wrought from sheep, buffalo, and elk horns, secured with deer and elk sinews, and ornamented with porcupine quills and generally about 3 feet long. We obtained a large number of deer, elk, and sheepskins from them of the finest quality, and 3 large, neatly dressed panther skins in return for awls and axes, kettles, tobacco, ammunition, etc. They would throw the skins at our feet and say, "Give us whatever you please for them, and we are satisfied. We can get plenty of skins, but we do not often see the Tibubos, or people of the sun." They said there had been a great many beavers on the branches of this stream, but they had killed nearly all of them, and being ignorant of the value of fur, had singed it off with fire in order to drip the meat more conveniently. They had seen some whites some years previous, who had passed through the valley and left a horse behind, but he had died during the first winter. They are never at a loss for fire, which they produce by the friction of 2 pieces of wood, which are rubbed together with a quick and steady motion. One of them drew a map of the country around us on a white elk skin with a piece of charcoal, after which he explained the direction of the different passes, streams, etc. From these we discovered that it was about 1 day's travel in a southwesterly direction to the outlet or northern extremity of the Yellowstone Lake, but the route from his description being difficult and beaver comparatively scarce, our leader gave up the idea of going to it this season, as our horses were much jaded and their feet badly worn. Our geographer also told us that this stream united with the Yellowstone after leaving this valley half a day's travel in a westerly direction. The river then ran a long distance through a tremendous cut in the mountain in the same direction, and emerged into a large plain, the extent of which was beyond his geographical knowledge or conception. On the 30th, we stopped at this place, and for my own part, I almost wished I could spend the remainder of my days in a place like this, where happiness and contentment seemed to reign in wild, romantic splendor, surrounded by majestic battlements which seemed to support the heavens and shut out all hostile intruders. Russell's wonder and sheer awe of the landscape in which he found himself is a feeling shared by many, united across time by emotions stirred within them by the park. But behind the awe, hidden beneath the soaring beauty of natural heritage, lies a darker side of history. Yellowstone's song is one familiar to many. The names of white men who ventured into what they believe to be unknown and unspoken for land remain remembered in history, while the brutal dispossession of indigenous peoples is often overshadowed. Names like Hayden, Washburn, Langford, Cook, Coulter, and Folsom are commonly heard when discussing the history of Yellowstone. But the names that are regularly forgotten are Sheep-Eaters, Shoshone, Crow, Bannock, Blackfeet, Flathead, Kiowa, Arapaho, Nez Perce, Assiniboine, Northern Cheyenne, Gros Ventre, Sioux, and other associated tribes. Yellowstone should be celebrated for its wonder and natural splendor, but we cannot forget that the people who lived there for thousands of years were once forced from their homes. The ongoing colonization of the Yellowstone region was justified by a perpetuated myth that the Native American people of the area, some of whose oral histories name this region as the birthplace of their ancestors, were afraid of the land, with its wild volcanic springs and belching geysers. Yet archaeological evidence, combined with oral histories, dispute these early claims, as sites near some thermal areas indicate people once camped there, and tribes' own histories place their origin in the park. A land of beauty and plenty, used by many tribal nations, Yellowstone's history does not begin with the naming of it as a national park, nor does it begin when European settlers first colonized the area, probing into its depths to see what wonders it held and taking the land by force from First Nations people. No, Yellowstone's history begins 11,000 years ago. Early First Nations people used the region to hunt, gather, and engage in religious ceremony. Archaeological sites dotted around the park still remain to this day, a window back in time, allowing us to see and begin to understand how these people would have once lived, and how they may have engaged with the world around them. Nearly 2,000 archaeological sites, many of which lie within the regions surrounding thermal features of the park, suggest that native people weren't afraid of this area, as do accounts from anthropologists Peter Nabokov and Larry Lohendorf. One thing that Yellowstone historian Lee H. Whittlesey notes in discussing Lohendorf and Nabokov's manuscript, titled American Indians and Yellowstone National Park, a documentary overview, is that prior to the publication of this book, we knew very little about the associated tribes of the region. 27 of them are now listed on the Yellowstone National Park's website, along with a timeline of human history. Whittlesey notes that early whites in the area of Yellowstone National Park endeavoured to make the park safe for other white visitors. It was these attempts at safety that led to the physical removal of tribes from their ancestral grounds, and led to these rumours and myths that the original inhabitants of the region avoided the land for the fear of evil spirits and demons that dwelled within. This, of course, was nonsense, but it was merely a symptom of the wider problem of colonization and dispossession. Whittlesey believes historic accounts of Yellowstone tribes keeping their knowledge of Yellowstone private, having experienced the hunger and greed exhibited by European settlers. We know that Kiowa and Crow oral histories place their people in the Yellowstone region, but the verity of some other stories shared today are debatable. As a historian, Whittlesey refers to a number of these stories as white baloney, arguing that they are not genuine stories from Native American tribes, but instead tall tales told by white authors with white agendas. What we do know are the original names for Yellowstone and the surrounding areas. These names are evocative, representing the features that these people found important within the park. To the Crows, Yellowstone was the land of the burning ground, or the land of vapors, and they call the geysers, what we know by other names today, Bide Mape, sacred and powerful water. To the Blackfeet, Yellowstone was many smoke. For the Kiowa, the place of hot water. While the Bannocks had a more simple, but still descriptive name for the area, Buffalo Country. Though Whittlesey scoffs at many white authors trying to pass off stories as genuine Native American myth, there are some that he believes to be genuine. For the Shoshone and Bannock people, there is the story of the Snake and Yellowstone rivers. As Whittlesey recounts it, the story was handed down in the Shoshone and Bannock tribes, and is referred to him only as the Ralph Dixie story, for the Shoshone man who told it. As the story goes, long, long ago, There were no rivers in this area. No Snake or Yellowstone River wound its way through the land until a man came from the south. This man was inquisitive, curious, sticking his nose into everything and causing trouble. He travelled north, past the Tetons, and further afield until he climbed a mountain in what we now call Yellowstone. There, he met an old woman, sitting with a basket of fish. The man was hungry and asked the woman to boil him some fish to eat, a request to which she agreed on one condition: that he be mindful of her basket and leave it where it lay. But he did not listen, and upon stepping on the edge of her basket, sent water and fish spilling over its edge and down the mountain. The man ran ahead of the water, trying desperately to stop its flow by piling rocks in high dams to hold it back. But one by one, each of the dams that he built burst. In their place now lie the upper and lower falls today. Still the water did not stop and rushed on, creating the Yellowstone River. The man ran swiftly to the opposite side of the fish basket and followed its water downstream. Again he tried to stop the flow of the water with piles of rocks, and again the water burst free from his dams. On this side, the spilled water created the American and Shoshone Falls on the Lake River, and the basket was Yellowstone Lake. The old woman is thought to be Mother Earth, the man himself, Coyote, a trickster figure in many Native American mythos. A land as rich with wonder and natural beauty as Yellowstone, it's no surprise that the strange features of the land, like mudpots and geysers, were the subject of myth and tales. One such story has been, according to Whittlesey, passed down amongst the Crow tribe from a man named Sharp Horn. This story speaks of Yellowstone's geysers and how they were created through the mythic deeds of Old Woman's grandchild. This he cites from Nabokov and Loendorf, whose book on the subject is rich with information and history. In Yellowstone, though it was not called that then, Old Woman's grandchild fought many beasts, turning them into the mountains and hills that now dot the landscape. One such beast, a buffalo bull, turned into a geyser formation, continuing to bellow and belch hot air from where his body lay slain upon the ground. Kiowa oral traditions place the origins of their ancestors in this great land, the birthplace of their people. The bravery of a man whose name is long forgotten is the reason why the Kiowa have a homeland, according to this legend. Whittlesey, again in referencing Nabokov and Loendorf, mentions a Kiowa informant who refers to this man as Khan Hain. Long ago, when the Kiowa's great spirit, Dokai, first put people on Earth, there was no homeland for the Kiowa people. Dokai promised their people that he would make for them a homeland if they would undertake a dangerous, perilous journey across a barren landscape rife with danger and rumbling with volcanic activity. In this land the ground shook, and clouds of steam shot up from holes and cracks in the ground. There, amongst the steaming landscape, lay a boiling pool that raged and bubbled against the rock, bellowing like some great beast. Many Kiowa were afraid and ran, but Khan Hain and others remained. Dokai motions to this terrible pool and told them that this land would belong to the tribe of any man brave enough to dive into its depths. The people were apprehensive, as this hot, steaming land did not hold or offer much. But Carnhain trusted in their creator, knowing him to be benevolent and wise. He dove into the boiling waters, his skin seared by the heat. Carnhain thrashed as he burned, eventually losing consciousness. But soon he was pulled from the water by his people, crying in victory. Dokai was gone, but in his place the landscape had been transformed. No longer was it barren and desolate, but now covered in thick forests, lush meadows, and flowing, clear streams. This place is known to us today, with modern-day Kiowa identifying the location within the park as Dragon's Mouth Spring. Given the prominence of volcanic activity in the park, and the awe that these features still inspire in people to this day, is it any wonder that the first people who lived in this region considered them sacred and powerful? A landscape filled with such places, like Yellowstone, surely had to have been the result of something great and powerful. These stories, passed down in oral tradition and still recounted today, are important pieces of evidence to historians and anthropologists like Whittlesey and Nabokov and Loendorf. For Whittlesey, it shows strong proof that Native Americans did not fear Yellowstone, as early white settlers had tried to claim, but rather revered it for its spiritual and natural power. Historians and anthropologists are not the only ones with a keen interest in the history and culture of the people who came before the park. With over 2,000 sites scattered across the park's landscape, archaeology is a powerful tool for learning more about the human history of Yellowstone. Evidence of people existing in Yellowstone spans thousands of years, and it's not only modern-day archaeologists who are interested. The second superintendent of Yellowstone National Park, Philetus W. Norris, for whom Norris Geyser Basin is named, had a keen interest in Native American culture, asking for workmen in the park to bring any artifacts discovered to him. Together with the United States Geological Survey and the Bureau of American Ethnology, Norris removed a number of artifacts from Yellowstone, including stone spears, an atlatl, arrow points, and various tools. These items were sent to the Museum of Natural History, where they are still present and available for study to this day. But for 30 years following the end of Norris's term, very little was recorded about the park's history or archaeology. Today, archaeology is an important facet of study for the National Park Services. From X-ray fluorescent analysis, we know that volcanic glass from Obsidian Cliff entered into a wide trade network. Tools and ceremonial artifacts made using obsidian quarried from this region have been discovered all the way from Western Canada to the Midwest. Thanks to this form of fluorescent analysis, obsidian can be identified and linked to specific lava flows through a chemical fingerprint. The oldest obsidian artifact discovered in the region was a Clovis point, a distinctive projectile point dating back to 11,000 years, and created by early Paleo-Indian Americans, the Clovis people. The archaeology program in Yellowstone, which began in 1995, has uncovered over 2,000 sites in the park, many of which have yielded other Paleo-Indian artifacts. A number of these are clustered around Yellowstone Lake. But many of these artifacts and sites have been discovered in developed areas, as archaeological resources have been identified through the National Historic Preservation Act. Before construction can take place, Surveys must be undertaken to determine whether the work will harm a site, and if so, how best to avoid or minimize that harm. The National Historic Preservation Act came into being following World War II and built upon the Antiquities Act of 1906 and the Historic Sites Act of 1935. President Lyndon B. Johnson convened a special committee on historic preservation, which in 1965 released a report called Heritage So Rich. The National Historic Preservation Act was passed before the end of 1966. It was the first national policy governing preservation. Sadly, 23 of these known archaeological sites no longer exist. Erosion, flood damage, construction work, and sites being combined together into a singular one have left their mark. But the sites are there and known, at least in the areas that have been surveyed. Only 3% of the park has been surveyed, making it nearly certain that other archaeological sites remain scattered across the landscape, untouched and waiting to be discovered. Today, archaeological efforts are ongoing, as are conservation efforts to protect the park. The National Park Services works diligently to keep this land safe and to ensure that it remains for many thousands of years to come. Rich with history, wildlife and beauty, Yellowstone's story is nowhere near over. Each year, millions flock to see its wonders, to learn its history, and to revel in its beauty. Though as a national park it dates back to just over 150 years, we cannot forget its 11,000-year legacy.